Good evening. My name is Keith Romano. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Inland Wetlands.
Is Attorney Green here?
I don't know.
Yes, he's on the screen.
Just making sure.
I don't see. Okay, start. Good evening. My name is Keith Romano. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Inland Wetlands Commission meeting for the town of Monroe. It is December 2nd, 2020. The time is 7:09 p.m. Is the recorder on?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to take roll call the members of the commission and staff present during tonight's remote meeting. Please answer here or present, starting with myself, Keith Romano, Lois Spence, our vice chair and secretary.
Here.
Jim Stewart, who is our treasurer and also a licensed surveyor and engineer in the state of Connecticut. Clark Gingras. Here. Ross Masaraco.
Here.
BJ Hall.
Here.
Denise Halstead, our inland wetlands agent.
Here.
Donna Stasinski, our office manager. Yep. And Sarah Stroud, recording secretary. And our counsel, Barbara Schellenberg.
Here.
Before we start, I'll read our mission statement and how the meeting will proceed.
I don't see this, Sarah.
Is she here?
I don't see Sarah.
I don't see her on here either. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Okay.
No one's taking minutes?
She'll have to watch the recording and make them from there.
She is normally on just for purposes of the minutes.
Yep. That's what her position is taking minutes and putting them out for us.
Well,
She thinks
can
she's
somebody
aware.
try to get in touch with her?
I have no way of getting in touch with her. I don't know.
And where is Donna on?
No, Donna's not on.
She's supposed to be here?
Nope, she's not going to be here tonight.
Oh, okay. All right. So what do I do? What do we do? Just keep on going, or?
We keep on going.
Yes, we
Somebody
are
else?
recording, so we should keep
Somebody
going.
else take minutes?
All right. The Inland Wetlands Mission Statement. The objective and purpose of the Inland Wetlands Commission is to provide for the overall protection and preservation of the inland wetlands and water courses within the town of Monroe. Meeting procedure. In the normal course of our meetings, we will hear public hearings and other applications. The protocol for public hearings is to have an applicant make a presentation to the commission, during which and after which the commission will be asking the applicant questions. During remote meeting status, I'd like to ask the applicant to keep his presentation as concise as possible. This is a special meeting, so we already know how this goes. Please keep all comments pro and con specific to inland wetlands related matters. This is the only thing on the agenda, so there won't be any changes. Is there anybody in the public that wants to speak in a general nature about this application?
Mr. Romano, I have one comment I need to make at some point before we actually begin, but I don't want to preempt members of the public if they have something to say.
It doesn't sound like anybody's saying anything, so go ahead, Mr. Finn.
So we're a little concerned that no one's taking any minutes. I understand the idea that those can be taken from the video, but I am a little concerned that this is uncharted waters, as we all know, and I would suggest that perhaps someone, and I hate to volunteer Ms. Halstead, but at least someone take some minutes of this meeting just to make sure that we don't run into any problems in the future.
Yeah,
All right.
I agree. I mean, look, the minutes do not have to be detailed. It can be really of a general nature, just as to what happened, who spoke, and just generally what was.
Well, then, excuse me, so I could get some paper.
I really think if Sarah watches the recording and makes notes from there, that covers everything that everyone has said. So that should be sufficient. since we're all,
Mr. Hall,
Let-
you may be right.
Let's play it on the safe side. As I
Margaret,
said, they can be general. They don't have to be detailed.
Margaret Minor, you submitted something today, and asked to speak. I don't know if you could, if you're on, but. Just want to make sure.
I'm on. Thank you, Russ.
Okay, yeah, just because they asked and nobody responded, and I want to make sure, because you submitted something in writing, so I want to make sure that gets on the record. As far as minutes, and I'm consultant for the commission, Russ Dorenzo, perfectly okay to do minutes from a tape recording. We've done that before, but I agree the safe way is to have somebody take general minutes.
Okay. Oh. Looks like Donna's on. Just give it a minute. Denise, you said she's not supposed to be on tonight?
No, she's been out sick. She was away and she came back sick.
Because her name just popped up in a box on my screen.
I don't know why, but Georgia from Planning and Zoning just texted me and she is doing the minutes, but I don't see her on just yet.
Okay.
Oh, she's gonna do it from the recording.
Okay. Just to get the record straight, also want to mention that our special advisor Russell D'Arienzo is with us tonight, and also Chris Sullivan from the Conservation District. I'm gonna, and then also for public comment, let's let Margaret Minor say what she has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, I thank you again for the, it's in an email, the attention you've given this complicated project. As I mentioned, the solutions proposed by the experts have varied radically from the original application. Again, I urge you to ask the applicant to bring in a fresh application that he feels best suits the inclination of the commission and the advice of experts. Rejection without prejudice is the safer course than trying to reshape and augment an application through conditions drafted at the 11th hour. In the long run, a new submission crafted by the applicant will most likely simplify your work and that of the town. Although I must mention, you may not be interested in anything in the long run at this point, but it might be more simple. As I've said, the protection of AA watersheds is highly important to the well-being of local communities and all residents. It is not easy, especially for commissioners at the local level, whose deliberations are subject to sharp scrutiny and hindsight complaints. Again, many thanks for the attention and effort you're giving this application. And obviously, my belief is that it would be cleaner to come in for the applicant to bring in a new application and a decision without prejudice. Thank you. Thank you. You've been amazing.
Margaret, just for the record, state your name and address again. I don't know if
Oh,
I heard
yes.
that.
Margaret Minor, M-I-N-E-R. Let's see, I gave Roxbury now my office. So 53 South Street, Roxbury, Connecticut.
All right, thank you. At this point, we will have the applicant continue on with their presentation.
Good evening, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Kevin Soley. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut with Soley Engineering. Office is located right here in Monroe at 501 Main Street. I'm not sure if anybody can make me a presenter so I can share my screen.
I can make you a presenter.
Okay.
Give me a second. It didn't come up the way it should have, but I figured it out. You should have the ability right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
So obviously tonight is the continuation or the continuation of the application at 64 Cambridge Drive and 4 Independence Drive. With me here this evening, we actually have a number of our professionals, and what I'd like to do tonight is we're going to have Derek Jones from WSP, our LEP, on the project, discuss some additional environmental testing he completed on the property. Ken Taylor, our hydrogeologist who submitted a hydrogeology report, is going to talk a little bit about his investigation and his findings. He hasn't had an opportunity to kind of really present his findings to the commission. Bill Kenny, our soil scientist, is going to present a response to all of the questions and comments raised by George Logan, one of the soil scientists for the intervener. And then I'm going to come back in front of everybody and kind of summarize the minor revised plans that we had submitted about 2 weeks ago after the last hearing. Some of what we actually talked about at the last hearing, but I want to kind of go through those. And then I want to also answer some of the questions that the commissioners had at the last hearing and run through some of the information that has that I think Russ Lorenzo and some other people had, weren't exactly sure where it was in our application. I wanted to kind of go through all of those questions or some of that information that seemed to have been, that wasn't readily apparent, and kind of point to everyone where those things are, and then continue to answer any questions the commission may have. So we'll try to be as efficient as possible. But first, I think, is Derek on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Hey, Derek. So just to orient everybody, just again, the location, the site's on the north end of Pepper Street here, 64 Cambridge Drive and 4 Independence. And then I'm going to give it over to Derek to let him provide some of his analysis and talk through some additional testing that was completed to further prove that the site is clean, to address a lot of the concerns that were raised by some the intervener and some others on the project. So take it away, Derek.
Okay, so I came before you, I believe, in September with a more limited data set that included sampling from 6 different types of materials that had been placed at the site. We've since gone back a couple times and done.
Excuse me. Could you please state your name and position for the record? Thank you.
Yep. Derek Jones. I'm a licensed environmental professional with WSP USA out of Shelton. Right. So we've since been back and a couple more times and expanded our scope of work to include the completion of 10 soil borings across the fill that's been placed at the site, and the sampling of existing groundwater monitoring wells that are at down gradient portions of the site. So to supplement the prior work, which included sampling of the pond water at the northern end of the site. Okay, so basically the types of materials we saw at the site were a stockpile of imported soil from a construction project in the area, from the area, stockpiles of concrete, brick material that was in amongst mixed debris that included asphalt, fragments, concrete, soil, bricks, and then significant areas of native overburden soils that had been displaced from where they originally were, as well as screenings from the quarrying operations.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Is this Mr. Green?
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, someone's speaking. Can we let them finish?
Well, I just have a point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is this an exhibit that's been submitted into the record in this case?
I don't know. Who would answer that?
So, Mr. Green, Derek just completed some additional investigations in a report. It will be submitted to the commission tomorrow. We did not want to submit information or provide any hard copies of anything the day of a hearing, but we felt it was important to present the information to the commission for their consideration. And we'll be providing written copies of this additional investigation report tomorrow.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as Mr. Finn can advise the commission, first of all, under the executive order by the governor, all materials, as Mr. Finn pointed out, must be submitted to the commission at least 24 hours in advance of a hearing, anything to be presented. And Mr. Solly, providing it tomorrow is even worse than presenting it tonight and then providing it tomorrow. And I would also submit that pursuant to section 9E, section 1 of the Inland Wetland Regulations of the Town of Monroe, all documentary evidence submitted by the applicant and/or respective consultants shall be filed with the commission and available for public inspection no less than 5 business days prior to the day of the hearing or reconvening thereof. And to make this more egregious, at the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission 2 weeks ago, the applicant stated that it had a report that it would be submitting the next day, and nothing has been submitted.
Excuse me, Mr. Green. Derek Jones has been dealing with a sick, immediate family member, which has prevented him from giving us this final report. And out of respect for him, he is still here tonight to talk about it. But there was a serious health issue that prevented us from getting that report submitted in time. So while I appreciate the egregiousness or your alleged egregiousness, we are doing our best to keep this project moving forward in a timely manner.
I'd like to be heard as well on this topic. The fact of the matter is that we learned about this special meeting. It was confirmed to us very late last week. We all know that Thanksgiving intervened. This is a special meeting. And so we did the best that we could to be prepared for this special meeting. And so I do, and as Attorney Green indicated the last time when he submitted materials less than 24 hours before the hearing, the day of the hearing, in fact, Mr. Logan put up his report while he was speaking at one point. And that was far more egregious than this, given the fact that this is a special meeting and we've had very little time to prepare. We're trying to cooperate with the commission, go forward with the special meeting. These are special circumstances. But Mr. Green also pointed out that rule from the executive order, to the extent feasible, and under all these circumstances, especially because this is a special meeting and because Thanksgiving intervened, we've done as best as we can. And I think that's all that is required under the circumstances. The commission has the authority to determine when and if the submission date for materials. And I would suggest that we should go forward and move the ball along at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, everybody. I want to consult with our counsel. Barbara, your thoughts on this?
I think the public hearing is not going to be closed tonight. The objections are duly noted. There will be opportunities at the next meeting to respond. It is certainly not an ideal situation. And to the extent that we are continuing with the public hearing, it would be certainly in everybody's best interest to get materials to the commission and all parties involved in enough time to be able to review before they are discussed. So to the extent that we will have to come back next week and address these exhibits, we will do so. But I agree that we should continue tonight as we have done in the past.
Mr. Chairman, Russ Lorenzo, can I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Russ.
This issue that Derek's bringing up, and Derek, I know Derek very well. I hope your family's safe. Again, the commission keeps getting pulled in different directions. The commission's charge is an application before it to fill this quarry for remediation. I don't see an application just to fill the quarry. It's to fill a quarry to remediate Vernal Pool number 2. End of story. The amount of fill there, what's in the fill, contamination, again, is DEP's jurisdiction. It's that simple. DEP solid waste unit has entered a complaint number. So obviously, since DEP did that, I don't know if everybody's aware of that, but Margaret Miner has filed a complaint. The complaint has been accepted. It's been given a number, and DEP will be investigating if illegal dumping has been performed at this quarry. The issue before the commission is simple. It's what's in the application. The application calls for a 2,300 square foot building with parking lot and septic, and to remediate a toasted, again, I'm going to use that word, toasted vernal pool due to the lowering of the elevation of the quarry, which was illegally created. It's pretty clear to me. And the proposal is to bring it back to original grade to bring that vernal pool back to life. I think what Derek's information is, and I haven't seen it, is probably important information, but it should be taken up at the next meeting after the intervener has had the proper chance, as me and everybody else, to review it. It shouldn't be presented. Mr. Green is right. It can't be presented. It wasn't submitted on time. It needs to be submitted next week. But so I agree with Barbara that we continue, but we focus on what our jurisdiction is and what the application's asking of us as a commission, and that's my 2 cents.
All right, thank you, Russ. I'll ask the applicant, whoever wants to respond. At this point, is Derek's testimony at this point, is it more relevant to the filling operation, which is going to be, P&Z DEP, or is it really related to the wetlands portion of this application? I think it's I think it's good advice that whatever he's going to present, that we do get a chance to look at it first, and especially if it's on the lower side of importance, I guess, way to put it, for this application. Maybe we should be, spending our time on professional testimony that has to do with more of the wetland side of this. Now that we know there's kind of like a line, a dividing line a little bit here with this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Attorney Steve Finn on behalf of the applicant. Frankly, we agree 100% with Mr. DiOrenzo that the environmental aspects of this property and this kind of testing is really relevant to DEP concerns and not to the jurisdiction of this Wetlands Commission. The problem that we've had over these last 7-8 months is that the intervener keeps raising this issue, and on occasion we get questions from 1 or 2 commissioners voicing concerns about the kind of material that's been there, about what material is going to be used to fill the hole. So in order to be prudent and to try to allay concerns that we don't believe are not relevant to this application, but because the commission has asked for it and because we need to build a record, and we have decided to go beyond what we think is your purview to provide this information to you. It's sort of to give you, to those extent that 1 or 2 commissioners has some concern, we wanted to allay those concerns. But if everyone's agreed, and I think we are, that this issue initially raised by the intervener is irrelevant, then I agree, we do not have to present this information. So if everyone's on board with that, fantastic. It will streamline the process. It will get you concentrating on those issues that really are within the purview of our application and within your jurisdiction.
Right.
Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Finn. I agree with that. I think it's kind of, you know, after all these months to recently get some information saying that we've been looking at information and testimony stuff that really doesn't apply to us. You know, there will be, you know, some kickback and memories type of stuff, but I think a lot of us, I'm going to speak for the commission, and when we get a chance, if anybody wants to say something different in our first comment break, but I do think we realize that the material coming in is not in our jurisdiction. So let's get to, you know, get to the important stuff. Let's get the testimony that's going to help us make a decision in the wetlands related aspects of this application.
Great. I'll ask Kevin to continue, and I don't know if Bill Kenny wants to go next or what, but I'll leave that up to Kevin.
Yeah, I think we were going to have, Derek, thanks for joining us tonight, but we will move on from the environmental discussion. But I would like to have Ken Taylor, our hydrogeologist, who prepared a report which was submitted back in October. He hasn't had an opportunity to really present the findings of that report. I think Russ Lorenzo did a good job of summarizing that report. But I think it would be best for the commission to hear from Ken directly, as he is our professional hydrogeologist who completed the analysis, and we think it'd be good for him to just summarize the investigation that was completed and his findings, and discuss the hydrogeology component of this application.
Okay.
So
I'm here.
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay. My name's Ken Taylor. I'm the supervising hydrogeologist at WSP. And as Kevin said, I was retained to look at the hydrogeology near the wetland systems, specifically the shallow groundwater in the areas of the wetlands. The report or the report that I submitted, as part of that, we did a detailed review of the published data, which you've all seen before, the surficial geology maps, the bedrock maps, water resource bulletins, things like that. I think those things have already been presented, so I won't go into detail of that. Also reviewed a Fuss and O'Neill report that was completed in 2002, which was done on 64 Cambridge Drive property and the adjacent property at 490 Pepper Street. As part of that evaluation, Fuss and O'Neill had installed 16 test pits, 16 test borings, 8 monitor wells. They provided geologic logs for all that for all that information, and they collected groundwater data, which demonstrated, which was presented in the report, showed that the wetland 1, which is located in the southwestern portion of the property, was a shallow groundwater discharge point. And we use that information along with our review of the document prepared by the Southwest Conservation District to develop kind of a work plan on to obtain additional information on the shallow groundwater. As part of that, there were two groundwater monitoring wells installed into the shallow bedrock along the western portion of the property. Monitor well 1 and WSP monitor well 2. It's not on that, but
oh, sorry. I'll go back to that.
oh, just blow up the upper right hand portion of that if you can. There you go. They're the blue dots anyway. There you go. That's a little bigger. a little bit more. There you
I
go.
can't go any bigger.
The two dots along the western, there's shallow bedrock wells. Those wells were drilled to both of those wells were drilled about 36 to 40 feet deep below grade. We also installed some shallow piezometers, and those are the triangles, the yellow triangles. There were piezometer nests installed at location A, which is to the, there you go, to the north. Location B, there was also a piezometer nest. And when I say nest, I mean there was a shallow piezometer. The screen was set shallow, and one was set just about a foot below that. So we have a shallow groundwater. There was a piezometer at C, and then there was a piezometer in the south western portion of the property near wetland 1. And that also was a shallow and a deep piezometer. And we use that data to obtain groundwater and shallow groundwater elevation information. And the table that you're looking at now is essentially the groundwater data from October 2020, the elevation data that was collected along with the estimated elevation of the monitoring point for the two shallow bedrock wells, and 3 existing monitoring wells, 1 deep, Monroe 101, which is near wetland 1, near the weight station, and 2 and 3, which were existing wells on the southeastern portion of the property either. And it so happened that those same wells were measured in 2002. So we got an opportunity to document that there wasn't a great deal of change between the pre-groundwater elevation wise, between the pre and post coring in the southwest portion of the property. The difference, as you see at MW3 there, about 3 feet, is similar to the difference you see the regional groundwater level fluctuation in the aquifer over the same period of time at a USGS well. So, which is good information to have, because it essentially says that there isn't the small fluctuation, that the mining or the coring operation didn't have a great deal of impact on the southwest aquifer system, or shallow bedrock aquifer system. The piezometers that were installed, and the piezometer D, which is in the southwest area again, also showed that there was an slight upward gradient. So all that is consistent, and it's especially impactful that in October, when these water levels were taken, we were essentially at a very extreme dry period, and near drought. So the water levels were really, really low. So any impact would have been magnified during that period. So can we go back to the figure there, Kevin, with the water levels on it? It's not the correct one.
We want the table? Sorry about that. Hang on.
That's not. You have the one for the
northern side? I do.
Yeah. findings are pretty much the basometers in this portion were all dry, which was pretty much expected because of the near drought condition. Well, I'll say because of the drought condition and because of the watershed, which would supply water to these wetlands in the northeastern part of the property, was diminished. But one of the key findings here, and we'll just get to the point, is there was there was water level in the 2 monitor wells in this portion of the shallow aquifer. Even though the elevation was 20 feet above the elevation of the pond water level and the elevation of the deeper monitoring well to this on the property. Also, there's faulting in joints that go through there that are very steep, and the idea is that this area, which Russ said, is isolated from the quarry portion of the property. And the reason why I'm very comfortable saying it's isolated is if there was a strong connection between the deeper aquifer from the quarry and the shallow aquifer beneath the wetlands here, the wetlands would drain out because they wouldn't be able to sustain the head. Groundwater flows, as has been said multiple times, along fractures in rocks from high elevation to low elevation. The significance of a 20-foot elevation and still being able to retain water in the shallow bedrock in the northeastern portion of the property highlights that there is an isolation, that this portion is isolated, and that any quarrying operations or any remediation operations isn't going to, from a groundwater standpoint, impact the wetlands. It also provides information that the activities of the quarrying likely did not cause fractures under shallow fractures under those wetlands and let the water drain out. Once, for the same reason that if that would have occurred, you wouldn't be able to maintain a water table in the 2 monitoring wells that were installed in that area. And finally, once the remediation takes place to hydrate the wetlands, we anticipate that the water level in the pond will raise to about 410 feet, which was the pre-level. And that was the level that during the initial digging that groundwater was initially observed coming in. So in summary, both of the wetland areas are well, the northeast is hydraulically isolated from the pit area and wasn't impacted during the excavation activities discernibly. So, and in the southwest, the fluctuations are similar from 2002 to a drought period in 2020. So those weren't impacted by the operations either. And for reasons is the drainage wasn't changed tremendously. It's still a groundwater discharge point. So we'll wrap it up with that.
Thank you, Ken, for that summary. I guess if the commission has any questions on the hydrogeology report, we would be happy to answer those now before we move on to Bill Kenny's presentation.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll just go through and ask all my commissioners, starting with Commissioner Spence. Do you have any questions for Mr. Taylor?
I do. I have one. The last statement that you just made was that you saw that the southwestern wetland, what we call wetland 1, was not significantly different now than it was in 2002. Was I hearing you correctly?
Correct.
So, but we have an issue in that all of our wetland experts said that there's probably more water in there now because there are no more breeding amphibians, and there was evidence of finfish, which kind of leads everybody to think that it's receiving a lot more water than it normally does and did not dry up despite the drought conditions this year. How do you explain that? Seems to be a little bit of an anomaly to me.
Well, I'm going purely in the elevation of the groundwater elevation fluctuations. What I did was I chose a USGS well, which has a continuous record since 2002. Looked at the fluctuation in water levels from the similar date in 2002 to the similar date in October when we collected our water level measurements, and the regional fluctuation was similar between the two. So from a shallow groundwater, and I'm speaking purely on groundwater standpoint, there wasn't a great change. Could there, I'm not an expert on surface water and things like that. So that might be the difference might be surface runoff rather than groundwater.
Okay.
And I can add to that too, Lois. Just so the elevations that were taken and reading the groundwater in this location, it was, you can see, it was around 405, 407, 406. The elevation at the edge of this wetlands is probably around, I'm going to say 410-ish or so. But then once you get into the deeper portions of this cryptic, vernal, or this wooded wetland, this forested wetland, this elevation is probably down about 403, 403 and a half, 404. So the surface elevation in the larger wetland is lower than the groundwater elevation readings taken in these upland wells. I don't know if that helped. Judging by your expression, that may not have helped.
Basically, what Kevin is saying is it's entirely possible for the groundwater. Remember, we're saying that the groundwater is feeding the wetland. What I'm saying simply is that that hasn't changed since 2002. Are there other factors that could have changed unrelated to the groundwater? Yes.
Okay.
That did help. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Spence. Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, Ken. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that the groundwater elevation in that pool was at 1.410.
Okay. Oh, you mean the what it was I heard from that when they were digging it, they first observed groundwater at about 410, 411 feet of elevation.
Okay. The application currently shows a natural fill going back to, I believe, 411 only. Does that provide enough buffer, in your opinion, to guarantee that the groundwater never gets above that level?
I don't know if I could I can't answer that. You're dwelling outside my level of expertise as far as buffering and things like that.
I mean, how much can groundwater go above how much does groundwater fluctuate in this area?
It depends on, but usually based on looking at the USGS well and the wells in 2002 and 2003, between 4 and 5, 6 feet, something like that.
Okay.
Now keep in mind that the groundwater elevation when we took the pond elevation, which I didn't discuss, when we took our measurements in early 2002 was around 380 feet.
Yep.
And in 2019, which I believe this photo is, it was about 400 feet.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sal, okay, Commissioner Gingras?
I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Massaraco?
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall?
Yes, I have one question, and it relates to this picture right here that's on the screen. You mentioned the faulting that runs from the north to the south, and I do not quite understand what you were saying. You were talking about it draining.
Oh, okay. I'll what I was talking about is their structures, joints and faulting, which run north south, and they dip steeply, meaning it's almost like it's almost like a plane, or if you took a piece of paper and dropped it straight down. When I say dip, and if there was a great connection, i.e., there's a lot of fracturing, and underneath the wetlands that were connected to those faults, you wouldn't be able to, the water in those wells there in the shallow rock would drain because they're 20 feet in elevation higher than in the pit. So if it's highly permeable and the water is easy to move and highly fractured and highly jointed, caused by activities, those wells would have been dry, and we would have had to drill them to to the elevation of 400 feet or so to get to the deeper bedrock aquifer system.
So if I understand, then the wells were holding the water, so the fractures did not allow the wetlands to drain into the pool there, or down to through the fracturing.
Correct. That's the theory. That's
Very
the
good. Thank you. That explained it.
Thanks. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Hall. Russ, do you want to recap for us any important points from Mr. Taylor's presentation?
No, I think he said it like I agree with everything he assessed.
All right. Thank you. All right, Kevin, back to you.
Mr. Chairman,
Great.
the interview have some questions.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead,
All
Mr.
right.
Green. If you have questions for this presenter, Mr. Taylor.
I'll defer to Mr. Glass, please.
Okay.
My name is Evan Glass with Alta Environmental Corporation, Colchester, Connecticut, representing the intervener. Hi, Ken. I'm a hydrogeologist as you are, and I have a couple of questions for you. As you know, the original drainage basin elevations before any quarrying was done was quite a bit higher than now. And the current plan is to raise the grade, quite a bit. As the grade is raised, would you expect that the water table would rise also?
Not necessarily. It will rise some, but not a lot. I wouldn't anticipate it, the water level to rise, significantly above that 410, 412 elevation. Simply because if you took out rock, so the water was in the fractures, so there wasn't as much. If you think about it, there wasn't as much porosity to hold water. You're filling in with unconsolidated material. There's more fracturing, more void space to hold water. So you wouldn't you expect the water level to go near the past elevation, but not to go all the way back there.
have you done an assessment of that, like a quantitative assessment of how high the water would rise? It's important here because they're trying to keep natural materials below the water table rather than the fill that we wouldn't want to talk about earlier in the meeting. And so it's critical that that they know where the water table will be so that they can make sure that only natural materials are below that level. So would it make sense to do some sort of a modeling or quantitative assessment of that?
I don't know that you would get that much from a modeling effort, simply because we don't have a lot of information to calibrate said model in the pre-existing condition. But on the regional, if you look at, there's a monitoring well, I think it's 2, was a deep well. I forgot how deep it was. Let me pull that. Let's see if I can. Monitoring well 2. No, it's not. Monitoring well 1. It's not the right table either. Just a second, and I will forward. Kevin, you actually had that table. No, you didn't. Never mind.
I have the report in front of me. Monitoring well 1 went, I think, to 36 feet. Monitoring well 2 went to 40 feet.
No, I'm talking about not the WSP monitoring wells. The
the Fuss and O'Neill ones?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a Fuss and O'Neill well. It's the well for dust suppression, which was labeled MW2. I have it. No, casing bottom. That well is 500 feet deep. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. That well is 500 feet deep, which is and near the elevation of the pond. So it's the deeper aquifer, and is reflective of the pond elevations. So the fluctuation of there, I think they're 2 or 3 feet apart. So you wouldn't expect there to be that much. You would expect there to be 4 or 5 feet fluctuation just based on the groundwater elevations and this deeper aquifer, which well 2 seems to be more directly connected to the pond elevation or the surface water elevation. So on a quantitative, we have reasonable information to estimate what we think the final level is going to be, which is how and if you do the math, it comes out to be close to the 410 that was observed where water was coming in at. So that's where I came up with that, using the well data, the regional water level data, and the observed data in the surface water.
Okay, so just as a follow-up, can you just sort of simply explain to us for the northern part of the quarry where that water-filled hole is now and where most of the concern for the filling is, what the groundwater elevations were before the quarry was used as a quarry? Before any materials got taken away. What was the water level there then? What is it now? And then what will it be after they complete their proposed filling? Just those 3 numbers: before, now and after? Final.
Well, but before, well, now, I think it was in March or so, 2020, it was 400. Before and after and before, it's going to end up being pretty close to being the same. You still have the same groundwater basin areas. You still have everything else. There's not going to be. You're going to expect it to be pretty much the same elevation it was once they're done as it was before the whole mining operation started.
But
It's not going to go higher.
Well, that doesn't make sense to me because the water table contours are a subtle mimicry of ground surface contours. But when there's a hill,
no, I wouldn't.
Mr. Chairman, point of order, please. Point of order, please. You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Chairman.
Hi. I have actually, yeah, 1 second. Let me just, because I need a clarification here because I think there's others that are probably as confused as I am. Mr. Taylor, I believe Evan Glass' question just they posed you was to give 3 elevation numbers, of which I think I only heard 1. I think you gave us the current elevation. Mr. Glass asked for what the elevation was when the well was probably drilled, and then I think he was asking was where you suspect it will be once the hole's filled back in.
Well, once it'll be around plus or minus 411 or so.
After.
After.
And where was it at the time the hole was drilled?
Around 411 plus or minus.
That's
and
not
obviously
a solid number. They didn't take a reading.
Well, I guess I'm confused. Are you talking about the mine pit, right?
Talking about Mr. Glass, I'm trying to help you get the answer to your question. I thought it was a good question, so I'm trying to make sure it was answered properly.
My question was for the area where the water-filled hole is in the north of the quarry.
Correct.
What was the elevation of the groundwater there pre-quarry?
Well, there was no elevation. You're talking about the Mr. Glass. Are you talking about from a test hole? From a well?
There wasn't a test hole there, but
next to it.
There was a big hill there, and the water table was somewhere, at some elevation in that hill.
Well, I can't give you an exact number of what that elevation was, but based on.
Let me help out again. Mr. Glass, they wouldn't know a groundwater elevation unless there was a well there before they dug the hole.
They wouldn't have.
So what data point are you asking for in your question?
Yeah, you can make inferences of where. What I'm trying to get at is that in general, the water table rises with ground surface elevations. The water table is if you look at a contour map of the ground surface and you look at a contour map of the water table surface, they are similar, except the water table of course is below the ground surface by some amount. And so as you take away ground surface elevation by digging, and as you then later add to it by filling, you're going to change the water table elevations.
Mr. Chairman, can I have a point of order, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, for the applicant, Attorney Finn. I think we've had a procedure whereby any questions posed to the applicant's experts has to go through the commission. And I think we've all agreed that it's the commission who gets to decide what's a relevant inquiry and what isn't. Now, with all respect to Mr. Glass, we've seen him raise what we've now determined are very irrelevant issues, asked a lot of questions about irrelevant facts. And I would suggest that any question has to be posed through you, and to the extent that the commission needs guidance, that Mr. Dorenzo be consulted about whether the inquiry is relevant or not. I also, second point of order, Mr. Chairman, is that Mr. Glass is allowed to ask questions. He's been designated now by the intervener as the only person who's going to be asking this witness questions. They're not allowed to have multiple questioners each expert, and that he's not allowed to make speeches. He's allowed to ask questions.
Agreed. Okay.
Those are my 2 points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Let me, hold on. We're good. We're good. I want to hear from Russell. I want him to in a way, explain if there was good relevance to, first, is there any relevance to what Evan Glass's question was to what we need to determine, and see if we should get the answer for it. Maybe you could help extrapolate the proper answer that we need.
Yes. The Bedrock aquifer, that pond you see in that quarry, has more to do with the west side than it does the east side. The east side, where the Vernal Pool is a separate bedrock aquifer. They're not connected. When you place material in that pond, the groundwater level will come up a couple feet. It's not going to overflow above 460 in elevation into the wetlands on the west side. I'm not sure of the relevance. When you fill a pond like that, groundwater comes back to what it originally was, which isn't far from what you see today. That's an expression of groundwater. That pond you see, that is groundwater. I recommend you fill it with rock for the exact reasons Mr. Taylor was talking about, where that way the groundwater will be better suited by filling with rock where it doesn't overflow. Never agreed with filling with mud. I want to make the statement that the commission could approve this filling, and you could approve it it has to be filled with natural fill, or clean fill is defined by DEEP, because that's the law. They can't put stuff in there that's illegal, or again, they violate DEEP's regulations. Second, Mr. Glass stated that we don't want to talk about that. It's not that we don't want to talk about that. We do want to talk about it. The commission needs to hear from Derek Jones as to the data that he obtained to answer their questions about the quality of the fill that's been placed there. But that can't be done tonight because it wasn't submitted in accordance with the law. So I think the geology has been explained over and over again. I think the questions that the commission needs answered is, if this is filled to what they propose to fill it, will that vernal pool be revived? Simple.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Russ. Who's that? Mr. Green?
Yeah. There's a certain inconsistency in this discussion, because what I'm hearing, first of all, to address Mr. Finn's comments, this is relevant, and I think his understanding of the role of an intervener. I'm not sure he has a firm understanding on that, but we are a party and we are entitled to ask questions, just as a commissioner is entitled to ask questions. But to get to the point, I'm hearing two contradicting points. Everyone is discussing, and I think the notion of filling what I'm going to call the quarry area with natural fill seems to be a conclusion that everyone is reaching. But until you know what the finished groundwater level is, then you don't know how much natural fill needs to go in. And I think that Mr. Glass's questions are probably directed toward that in order to get some reading on that. And am I correct, Mr. Glass? So
how does that affect wetlands?
I'm sorry?
Russ Dorenzo.
Yeah.
How does that affect wetlands? What Evan is asking. How does that affect wetlands? How does that affect the application? The application's to fill to remediate a vernal pool. The groundwater is not going to come up 20 feet. Mr. Taylor's already stated it would be 6 feet. End of story. So, okay, go ahead, Evan.
He said about 6 feet, and he is not Joel Green, for the record. He stated about 6 feet. And I think where Mr. Glass is going is to inquire as to the nature and extent of the natural fill that would be used in this instance. So I suggest it is relevant, but it's certainly within the realm of questioning by a commissioner or an intervener is my point. And with that, go to Mr. Glass.
All right, thank you, Mr. Green. I want to ask Russell for clarification on something because all these questions and all these testimonies, I think it's starting to spin our heads a little bit. Are we not concerned about what's going into the lowest water table there, the pond? Are we concerned about how that's getting filled in? And then again, only concerned after that to how we're remediating the surface and rehydrating the toasted wetlands? Is there two areas here that we're concerned about, the deepest and the highest, or are we not even concerned about the deepest part?
No, I think the deepest part should be filled with rock because that's the best way under construction standards to do it. That's the way it's normally done. The rest of what gets filled has to be cleaner natural fill in accordance with state law. If they use stuff that they're like polluted fill, they violate state law. You know, to say that they're going to do that is wrong because they can't do it by law. So why I'm equally confused about this discussion is I don't know how that affects what the proposal is. The proposal is to fill it to near natural grade to recreate the drainage that was there before so that the vernal pool comes back to life. That's what the proposal is.
Well, I'm not sure that
the groundwater that we're talking
Yeah,
about is 60 feet, Evan, 60 feet, 30 feet, I'm sorry, 30 feet below the top of what they proposed to fill. It's not going to go up 30 feet.
Russ, let me ask again. As a wetlands commission, are we charged to be concerned or to determine anything that has to do with filling in the deepest part of this hole right now? As far as how high the natural fill goes compared to when the DEP classified clean fill can go on top, and how much the water level may shift. So, you know, whatever that number is, how much has to be compensated from, pressure, whatever the hell you want to describe it. Do we care? Are we supposed to care about what goes in that hole? Are we only supposed to be caring about the top?
No, you have to look at what the application is. The application's to fill it to what it was before, so it will recreate
Can we get a
the vernal pool.
clarification on that? I'm sorry, Russ, but I might be confused, but I think there's been a revised site plan, and originally, and I could be wrong here because things have changed over time on this application. So I just honestly, for clarification, for everybody's sake, I believe the original application proposal was to recreate the topography very close to what it was pre-quarry. But then, in response to comments, the engineering was changed to lower it considerably from that. Is that true?
That's right, from 483 feet to 462 feet. Yes, they lowered it 20 feet. I'm not sure why. And those are the things the commission needs to focus on. I don't know how you do that and still recreate the vernal pool. What I'm trying to do is get the commission to focus on what their jurisdiction is. Your questions, Evan, I hear what you're saying, are not helping the commission understand that these aren't hydrogeologists. So the groundwater is 30 feet below the vernal pool. You had testimony saying that it may go up 6 feet. I don't think that much. And that aquifer you're talking about, Evan, the Bedrock aquifer, has nothing to do with the vernal pool. Nothing at all. It's not connected in any way, shape, or form.
Right, you're right. This has to do with your point about putting rock below the water table and finding out where that water table will ultimately be. But I do have a separate set of questions about the wetlands, about how the filling will affect the wetlands.
Hold on for a second. I'm getting contradicting stuff, and I want to make sure that we all are on the same page. Is my commission concerned? Is it our jurisdiction as to what level that lowest pit gets filled in with, say, natural soil to where it transfers into clean fill? Is that our jurisdiction? Because what I'm getting you from Russ, and excuse me if I'm wrong or if I'm confused, that you're saying we're only concerned about the water coming back into the wetlands. That's our charge. Then if you say that, and that's in fact the case, we don't give a crap, excuse my language, we don't care about what happens in that puddle, right? So I need to know where our jurisdiction is here and where we need to concentrate our efforts. Because I see we're talking about the deepest part and the very surface. And that's
Okay, I can answer that.
Thank you.
If they were to fill that and that water overflowed into a wetland, that would obviously cause different hydrology changing the wetland. The chances of that happening 6 feet from 400 when the top of the hole is at 460 are nil to none. So I prefer to focus on the plan that's before you.
All right, so then, so the way I understand it to get is that what Mr. Glass is telling us, and actually what Mr. Taylor is telling us, has nothing to do with what we're dealing with right now in this application.
No, the focus should be if it's filled to the elevation that they claim, forget what it's filled with. It has to be filled with clean fill by state law. I'm
Keith, can I ask you a
recommending the
question?
groundwater table gets filled with rock because that's general construction practices. It's good practice.
Okay,
The commission can condition that, but it's not really a wet. You could condition it so that it's done, that the filling's done properly, that it's filled with rock up to the top of the water table, and let's not quibble whether it's seasonally low or seasonally high. That's stupid. And then clean fill has to go on top of it. And when they do that, when they're done, does the vernal pool come back to life?
Okay.
I'd be talking more about the porosity of the fill, how that works.
We're gonna get
with
to that. I
natural
gotta
stuff.
ask my commissioner. I gotta let my commissioners chime in because I saw Lois's hand.
I get you.
Thank you, Commissioner Spence.
I have a question. Well, actually, it's not a question. It's more of a statement. It's not just the vernal pool. In my estimation, when you look at an application like this, you have to look at all of the wetlands it may be affecting. Now, I'm hearing that all of wetland 1 is being watered from groundwater discharge. So to me, it matters what the groundwater is going to be like if that's going to be discharging into the wetlands. If that groundwater ends up being compromised by fill that's placed too low, then that is a wetland concern in my head. Now, maybe it's not in others, but in mine, I look at the entire project, not just one little piece of it. It's got to be the whole thing, all of the wetlands that this project could affect. So in that respect, I thought it was a relevant question that Mr. Glass asked. And I was interested in that myself. That was on my list of questions because I want to make sure that whatever clean fill, which we know is not the same as natural or native material, is going to be above, and we want to make sure that there's a separation between those two. So that was my thought, and I just want to express it. So I think that we have to look at the whole application and all of the wetlands it affects, not just one little tiny piece of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Spence. That was very helpful. Commissioner Stewart, I saw you trying to chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Lois, but that's exactly what I was thinking. If the groundwater is feeding in other wetlands, we are concerned about the quality of the groundwater. But in addition, you're concerned about the fill potentially above that if water can percolate through that fill and get to the groundwater. So again, thank you.
Any other commissioners at this moment? Well, since I asked to have any questions, just chime in.
Mr. No comments here.
1 second. Let me just make sure my commissioners don't have any questions.
Yep, sure.
Anybody? Okay.
No questions.
Mr. Sullivan, if you would state your name.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris Sullivan from the Southwest Conservation District. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Taylor, I just I am also a little bit confused on some of this, and I wanted to get a little clarification and then ask a question or two about well 2 and the wetland 2. So well 2 is the objective of that well was to show that the groundwater is in that location and hasn't drained into the quarry pond. And because you found water in that well, that's what you were mentioning in your presentation.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the reasons. The other reason was to see if we could get a water table, which we couldn't.
Yeah.
And to see if there was the vertical gradient with the shallow piezometers. But being as it was kind of super dry, there's no water in the piezometers.
Right. So one of the things that I had been concerned about earlier, and I'm hoping that these wells can try to answer that, was that the wetland had drained from groundwater going down. And I'm looking at the map. I'm not a hydrogeologist, so I'm not an expert on this, but looking at the map and the wetland delineation lines, well 2's location is not in wetland 2. Based on the map that is being displayed. And there has been previous conversation about Vernal Pool 3 being a perched water body due to some sort of aquitard there. So my wondering is well 2 actually showing the conditions in the delineated red line for wetland 2?
Well, keep in mind that the two wells are in the shallow bedrock. They're not in the overburden material because the overburden was dry. So what I'm saying is those wells, the elevation of those two wells is very similar, and they're not spaced that far apart. So it's not unreasonable to kind of draw a line there and saying that the shallow bedrock aquifer, the water elevation in that area is constant. Or
I'm sorry, what were the two wells that you're talking about? I missed the. I'm looking at the map in front of me only. I don't have the report open. I'm sorry.
The map that's on this that's being shared right now that has WSP MW1 and WSP MW2 on it.
I'm looking at the blue dot in the northeast corner, WSP well 2. It
Right.
looks like it's outside of that wetland. Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for circling it.
What I'm saying is that the blue dot to the south is similar in elevation. So it wouldn't be you would expect that the shallow groundwater in that area is going to be similar in elevation. So so that blue dot would be relatively, the shallow groundwater would be reflective of the elevation within the red areas, basically what I'm saying, if I explain that correctly.
So you think that, and again, I'm just trying to clarify this because the dot to me is outside of the delineated wetland area due to the line, but you think that it is reflective of that, even though there was earlier discussions that Vernal Pool 3 was potentially a perched water body.
Yeah, but if Vernal Pool 3 is a perched water body, nothing that happens beneath it's going to impact it.
I understand that. That's why I'm curious that the well is. Look, I'm just trying to understand this because it's super complicated.
Basically what I'm saying is the piezometers that you see there, the yellow dots, they were all dry. So we don't have a lot, the unconsolidated deposits, there's not a lot of information on, but had the shallow rock been very connected to the west there, you wouldn't have had a water table there at all either. So that's what I'm saying. I want to be clear.
Yeah, Kevin, solely for the record, I think I might be able to ask some questions to craft this a little bit clearer. So I think Ken, just for verification and confirmation, your analysis has determined that the shallow groundwater perched wetland system for wetlands 2 and 3 and the associated vernal pools is disconnected from the deeper bedrock groundwater elevation.
Well, I think there's three. There's a shallow bedrock there's a shallow bedrock, and then there's the unconsolidated, and then there's the deeper. What I'm saying is we don't have really any information on the unconsolidated.
So I think Bill Kenny, who's going to be testifying next, can offer some conversation on that, because he did do shallow test pits in that area in March of this year or April of this year, and he did observe actually standing water. But just in October, when you installed the piezometers, those were dry from a shallow standpoint. Is that correct?
Correct. And the reason we put, two shallow and deep piezometers were that if it wasn't so dry, you could get information on the gradient in the overburden material, if it's upward or downward or whatnot.
Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Glass complete his questions now? We sort of diverted to allow some other questioning, but
Yeah, through the commission, please.
Thank you.
Through the chairman, Mr. Taylor, I have a question about if this filling occurs as proposed, rainwater that now falls on the quarry would fall onto the fill materials that would be placed there, infiltrate them and become groundwater, and then flow to wetland 2. Is that correct? That's the whole point of the filling, is to get the groundwater to flow to the wetland 2. Is that correct?
Not the ground. Let's get the surface water to flow through well too, from my understanding.
Kevin, maybe you can.
Hold on, Mr. Glass.
Sure.
Are you talking about as they're filling in the quarry into all the different lifts? Are you talking about when this is done?
When it's done.
Okay.
So Kevin Soley, just for clarification, yes, from a proposed standpoint, we're proposing to raise the grades to restore the watershed contributing to that wetland. And we're also proposing an impervious liner roughly 6 feet below proposed finish grade to ensure that any water that percolates through the surface would then travel along that liner and get to the wetland system as identified as wetland 2.
Thank you. And so, Ken, I've got two questions about that. One, does it matter at all to the wetlands what the quality of that fill is that the water is going to infiltrate into and then make its way to the wetlands? And maybe just start with that one first.
Mr. Glass, hold on, Mr. Glass. I want to just comment because it's through me anyways. There is an impervious liner going in here. So I don't understand how your question is asking the water that's going to get through from the surface. It's not going to get through the liner is the way I understand it.
Correct.
So the water will not be getting into the fill and then working its way back into the wetlands area.
But there's 6 feet of material above the liner, and my understanding was that 6 feet of material is the solid waste clean fill. That's what.
Let's let Mr. Soley answer that. He's the one who drew the plan.
We are proposing some clean fill above that liner to be then topped off with topsoil. Yes, and we would do that in accordance with DEP requirements. That's clean fill, not the solid waste or polluted soil that has been alluded to by the intervener's consultant many, many times.
Okay, so it is
the solid waste through the chairman. By definition, clean fill is solid waste. I just refer to it as solid waste clean fill for purposes of being clear. But so you'll have 6 feet of that material, or a little less to allow for some topsoil, 6 feet total, but most of it the solid waste clean fill. And so my question to Mr. Taylor is that an appropriate material to make groundwater from to flow to a wetlands that you'd like to rehydrate?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be heard on the relevance of that question. I don't believe this is Attorney Finn. I don't believe that's a relevant question. Mr. Dorenzo has testified that the commission clean fill is regulated, the type of fill is regulated by the DEEP. The DEEP is not going to, doesn't have.
Hold on, Mr. Finn. But if you're listening, Mr.
So-
Finn, if you're listening, we have some members of the commission who have voiced their concern about what is going to be leached into the soil and worked its way, off-site. So if it wasn't for those concerns, I would agree with you, but we can't because there's concerns here, and these people opinion is what matters. So if the question is gonna help them, then we have to let it be answered.
Look, I understand their concern and trying to do their job as best as possible, but we've heard from the independent expert that this commission does not regulate fill, that it's not part of your inland wetlands purview. So I maintain, look,
Hold on,
I
let me
understand the
stop
concern.
you for a second. Let me stop. The way I understand it is that our independent expert is here to advise us, but he doesn't necessarily have to tell us what to do. And we don't
Agreed.
necessarily have to side with everything that he says. We like, so again, we're not just here to be, cogs in the wheel and just let everything pass through us. We have to actually use our brains. And I think that for our own thought process, these questions need to be answered. And if there's and I'm trying to stop any information that my commissioners might find irrelevant, and they can stop me if which kind of happened just now. I thought we were past something, but they had more questions and concerns. So I'm going to let that information flow through them so they can decide.
Just understood, Mr. Chairman. It's Attorney Finn. Look, I don't expect them to accept wholesale what the independent expert says. I think they have to exercise their independent judgment. But there is a basic issue here, and that is clean fill, as approved by DEEP, has to be allowed to be placed in these types of holes. And so that's my point. The commission can take that for what it's worth. They can reject my view on that. But I wanted to state that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finn. And because it's just brought up, I mean, I think we're looking at different layers of material here, and some of them are going to have more impacts on things than others. So the 6 feet above the liner may mean a whole lot more to us than the 30 feet below it. And that's where where we have to ask the questions to make sure we, like this one coming up about the 6 feet above the liner, that's, from what Russ told us, which was that we're concerned about what's rehydrating the wetlands. That's kind of important to us. So I forgot where I stepped in with this rant.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Glass was asking questions before Mr. Finn.
Okay, well, he did ask a question, and I have a hand raised on my commission, so I'm going to go to Commissioner Spence.
Thank you. That was one of my questions, actually. I would like to know from the wetland experts whether or not providing groundwater at 6 foot underground is going to even get to the wetlands that we're trying to rehydrate. They're rehydrated by surface water, not by groundwater, by surface runoff. So something that's 6 feet underground is not going to have the same effect on that wetland that actual surface water would. So before we go through all of this back and forth, let's find out from a few wetlands experts whether or not that groundwater, if it does get there, would work the same way that surface water would work.
Lois, can you ask that to someone specific, and then we can get that going?
Well, I saw Mr. Kenny just came on. I'd like to hear from Mr. Kenny, and I'd like to hear from Russ.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Before we move on from the hydrogeology component, though, because Bill Kenny's about to give a presentation right when Ken's finished speaking. So I'd if we could stay on the hydrogeology component of this.
Okay, agreed, Kevin. All right, Mr. Glass, I'm just going to go to see if we get the last question out of Mr. Glass, because that's what we're trying to do here, right?
I was waiting for the answer to the last question is it appropriate to make groundwater by infiltrating precipitation through that 6 feet of solid waste clean fill to hydrate a wetland? And for the material below the liner, as the chairman has indicated, less concerned about that because the water is not going to infiltrate it. If we are concerned about water infiltrating through materials for the quality aspects of it, then can Mr. Taylor opine on all of that fill that's already been placed that's not under the liner, or maybe the liner does cover all the fill that's already been placed? So those two.
I think Derek Jones did a lot of work on that, so I think he covered that. That's not something I investigated, the fill that existing, so I can't answer that question.
Can Derek?
Well, Derek will next time when he's after his report's been filed. But you can ask that question again at that time.
Okay.
Anything else for Mr. Taylor before we can move on to their next testimony? Evan, that was to you.
No, thank you.
No, you're upset. Okay. Mr. Green, did you have something to say, or do we do take care of what your concern was?
Yeah, my just only question for Mr. Taylor was, so you have not, to date, you have not done an analysis of the water, once again, you've offered a kind of an opinion on the water level, on the water table level, but you have not done an analysis of the post-filling area, the area that will be filled with natural fill, as to what the finished groundwater level will be.
That's like getting a magic ball. That is a dumb question.
Thank you. Okay. I think
that's a future question.
I get you. Let's just have, I think it's a yes or no. It's a yes or no question. So, Mr. Taylor, can you give us a yes or no to Mr. Green?
The analysis done is in the report.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's been done. All right. So I think we could.
And to that, real quick, Kevin Soley, for the record, to that end, Mr. Taylor, the last sentence of your report says the estimated post-rehabilitation bedrock groundwater elevation would be approximately 411 feet. Can you confirm that's your analysis?
Yeah, that's what I came up with. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're the supervising hydrologist for WSP?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Kevin, it's back to you anyways.
Thank you. Ken, thanks for that presentation and that lively discussion regarding groundwater and hydrogeology. I certainly enjoyed it. Next, I wanted to ask Bill Kenny to kind of come and speak a little bit more about some of the conversation we've had about rehydration, and then also to respond to some of the interveners' comments that were raised at the last hearing.
Good evening. I'm Bill Kenny, principal of William Kenny Associates in Fairfield. I'm a professional wetland scientist and soil scientist and landscape architect. And what I'd like to do is go through briefly this evening some responses to comments and questions that were put forth by George Logan of REMA Ecological in his August 25th letter, and most recently revised in November. So he has 16 comments or questions in there. Just go through it quickly one by one. Now, before I do that though, I would say in summary, our conclusions continue to be that we feel very strongly that the restoration of Vernal Pool 2, Wetland 2 is the highest and best form of mitigation for this project, will have the greatest benefit, and that we feel that based on the additional information that continues to be gathered with regard to groundwater, watershed sizes, all this surface water and groundwater movement and so forth within these various watersheds, that we feel confident that the proposed design would be successful with that restoration. But let's get into the comments. The first comment was a question regarding the so-called Vernal Pool 3, and how can we feel confident that that pool has not been impacted its drainage? One, because its watershed, as George indicates, does not appear to have been affected neither the wetland area itself or the watershed doesn't appear to be affected. So the surface water or shallow subsurface flow to this area doesn't appear to be affected. And then two ways a system like this could be drained. One is you reduce the amount of water flowing to it by affecting its watershed, or you increase the amount of water leaving the wetland by perhaps fractures in bedrock, as has been discussed. So as Mr. Taylor has indicated, his information, his data that he's collected has indicated that the bedrock underlying VP3 and VP2 is not fractured in any way that's allowing that water within that upper portions of that bedrock to flow to a lower elevation, particularly to the quarry hole to the west. Now the overburden, it's always been my position that these wetlands in the northeast portion of the site are perched wetlands, and that you have a perched water table sitting above the bedrock. And that since the last glacier receded 15,000 years ago, these areas probably held water over rock initially up to some sort, or in some glacial till. Every time it rained, fines would wash down into these wetland systems, some of them, and start to clog that system over time, and it would help to perch a water table within there, in addition to the bedrock beneath it. So I believe it's perched water table in the overburden in the soils above the rock. Getting back to Vernal Pool 3, this system, we took a look at the soils and found that they are not wetland soils, that their colors indicate that water doesn't sit in this wetland for extended periods over normal years. So on average, over many, many years. And Chris Allen, a soil scientist, reviewed that as well, and I believe he agreed with our findings. So what that means to me is that this pool is very marginal, that it doesn't stay wet, it doesn't pond in most years, that it ponds more infrequently. If it were to pond every year on average through the growing season, through the mating season of vernal pool species, then those soils would indicate that. We'd have indications that the water, that those soils are saturated during those critical periods of time during the breeding season. So I do expect that it ponds in wet years. And this past year, based on weather data that we obtained from the Sikorsky Memorial Airport, it shows that the precip through November through when we did our sampling in the spring, so winter through early spring, is lower than the years, particularly George had asked about when the last time vernal pool work was done, which was in 2014. So we found there was less precipitation this year, maybe close to 10%. And so based on what we see with the soils, based on the fact that there was less precipitation this year than in 2014, we're not surprised that we didn't find water in that pool, and don't believe it's been affected by the quarry operations. Question 2 asks about why Vernal Pool 2, George, through his review, he understood that the watershed today, 2020, 2019, to Vernal Pool 2 was the same as it was in 2014 when the last vernal pool study was done. Based on measurements completed by Solely Engineering, it's our understanding that actually the watershed from 2014 was reduced by about 2/3, going from about 6.5 acres to just over 2 acres. So I think that's significant and a good reason for why Vernal Pool 2 is was lacking water this year, in addition to it being a bit of a drier year. But I think it's primarily related to the watershed. And if I could quickly comment on Lewis's question about subsurface flow, that water contributing to these wetlands is coming from I believe these perch systems is coming from 3 sources. One is direct precipitation. 2, in a forest, would be runoff. But if you remember, in a forest, the runoff is quite low relative to other
Bill,
sources.
you cut out for a second.
Okay.
Oh, Bill,
So,
you cut out for a second. Could you just go back to the three? Start over with number one. Three. You said there was three ways that it's getting
Yes.
hydrated.
Okay.
Start back at your point. Your first one.
Sure. Number one is rain falling directly on the wetland itself. Number two is surface water runoff, but in a forest, surface water runoff tends to be relatively small. But in a system like this, where you have bedrock that's relatively shallow beneath the soil, what you call shallow subsurface flow. Rainwater infiltrates into the soil. It falls vertically until it hits the rock, and the rock generally follows the slope and gradient, the aspect of the ground surface. So it hits that rock, and then it travels shallow through the soil until it discharges as a shallow subsurface groundwater discharge into the wetland. So, and if you look at the NRCS soil map for this area before it was disturbed, they mapped in this area Charlton Chatfield soils, which have soil depths of around 2 feet to over 5 feet. And it's over bedrock. So the water flows through that soil, hits the rock, and then flows to the wetland. And so what we're proposing with the liner is essentially the same. It is the same concept.
And Kevin Soley, for the record, Bill, if I could just interject, you and I haven't had a chance to review this, but we did prepare a figure which summarizes exactly that, and that's up on the screen now. So this plan basically shows a section through the site. Wetland 2 is to the right-hand side. And what we've done is we actually went back and looked at what that looked like previously, where you have the former grade from 2006, you have the depth to rock, and it was on average, it was between 7 and 10 feet of overburden when this site was excavated. And you can see how any water that would have infiltrated through the soils would then follow along that bedrock edge to feed that wetland. What we've done with our design mimics that, while our proposed grade is obviously considerably lower than the grade in 2006. With our liner, we're proposing the same thing, so that surface water would flow to the wetland, and also any water would also flow along that liner, which would mimic the same bedrock from the former condition.
Okay. Comment number 3 from the ARIMA letter asks for notes. We're going to provide photographs from our work in the spring and some notes. Comment number 4, do we think that we missed, sometimes the amphibians, when they migrate to the pools for breeding, they may come in more than one wave of migration, and do we believe we missed that? Now, with regard to Vernal Pool 2 and 3, we find that that's not relevant just because there has been no surface water in those pool areas this year. With regard to Vernal Pool 1, it's with continued review of this and consideration, there's 2 factors here. One is that we do believe that there's with the dewatering of the property and shifting of water from flowing to the east to flowing to the west, that there is additional water in that system. That system is heavily driven by groundwater, but I think that this dewatering, what it could do, rather than increase water levels, it increases the duration of surface water in these areas. So, and that could lead to the presence of the finfish that we saw. So it's more of an increase in the duration throughout the season rather than an increase in the elevation of water in the area. But lastly, I think perhaps even more importantly is that associated with the vernal pool is you have your critical terrestrial habitat, the forest that surrounds it, and the need to protect a certain area of that forest so that the animals that are breeding in the pool, they live in the forest, they need a certain amount of area to support a population. And with development to the west, if we look back at 2006, and the development within that critical terrestrial habitat was at a point where it could support the vernal pool species, and it was the same, generally the same. The critical terrestrial habitat in 2014 was generally the same, but from 2014 to current day, there's been in the southwest of Vernal Pool 1 offsite, those two developments immediately southwest, and they have taken the amount of critical terrestrial habitat forests below a threshold that I believe is critical, likely critical to another reason why we're not seeing breeding of species within that pool. Comment number 5, we will be submitting photos of regulated resources. And number 6, we've gone out recently and done detailed soil descriptions in VP2 and VP3. Just last week we were out and did 4 different descriptions, 3 through VP2 and 1 in VP3. One thing of interest, in 3 of the 4 holes, we did not observe any groundwater or saturated soil conditions within the upper part of the soil, so within a range that is critical for calling a soil a wetland soil, not within the 20 inches or so of the soil surface. But one of the holes in the central portion of Wetland 2, Vernal Pool 2, we found water within 22 inches. And so I think that is very significant and very important to our conclusions that this bathtub, this vernal pool, this bathtub doesn't have a hole in the bottom. It just is not getting enough water. That the faucet is running at 20% rather than 100%. And when it's at that 20%, the water's not rising up high enough within the soil profile to saturate the upper surface or to get ponding above the surface. So I think it's significant to show that we are getting that perched water table. It's just shallow. It's more shallow than it has been in the past. Number 8, I might have missed. Oh, no, and then number 7, I just addressed that with the depth of the water table. Number 8, we find, and this is a reason why we really think that restoring that wetland is the way to go. It's out of all the, will it be perfect? Is it gonna be exactly as it was in 2006? No, but even without any disturbance on this property, it wouldn't be exactly as it was in 2006. But what I can guarantee you, it's gonna be so much better than creating a new wetland from scratch. And a big reason for that is that the primary vegetative cover here is mature, stable, very complex, multiple layers. You have canopy trees, sub-canopy trees, understory, shrubs, ground cover, and the primary vegetation has not changed in any significant way. It's still there waiting, because for many wetland plants, they grow in wetlands because they tolerate wet conditions. They don't grow in wetlands because they need the water. So going through a dry period is not going to kill many of these wetland plants. There's going to be some that need the water, but for the most part, the trees, the shrubs, they tolerate those wet conditions. They don't require those wet conditions. So they find a way to survive through this period where they're getting less water. And comment number 9 is similarly being addressed with regard to monitoring of vegetative conditions. Number 10 is similar to response information I provided to the response to number 1. That has to do with reduction in precipitation and its effect on Vernal Pool 3. Number 11, I've talked about this, the restoring the hydrology to wetland 2. So we've gone over that, and Kevin has shown that with the section. Number 12, we did not, had not found any surface water in wetland 2. We didn't do any testing of water. We were pleased we could grab some water samples from wetland 4 and provide that. Number 13 asks for, can we provide a water budget for the wetland systems that have been, wetland 2 that's been affected with its drainage. The purpose of the budget, in my opinion, would be, one, to confirm why this wetland is drained. Is there a hole in the bathtub, or is there less water coming in through the faucet? I think that we've already dealt with that, so a water budget for that purpose is not necessary. The second purpose for a water budget would be, if we were creating a new wetland, you want to do a water budget to confirm that your watershed is large enough to create proper hydrologic conditions to support a wetland. But because this wetland developed naturally with its own watershed, we know what that watershed, what critical watershed size is, and we can restore that. So a water budget isn't necessary for that purpose. Number 14 asks about the critical terrestrial habitat information for each vernal pool. We did provide information with regard to that in our table 3 of our report that was initially submitted to the town on May 26th and then revised and resubmitted on September 9th. Number 15, can we provide pre-development and post-development monitoring? We are going to install additional shallow wells within Vernal Pool 3 and Vernal Pool 2 to allow for monitoring of this overburden, monitoring of the perched water table moving forward and during the restoration process. And we will provide a monitoring plan that explains what the scope of that monitoring will be during restoration and shortly thereafter. That concludes the 6 comments, and then just general statements. And I've touched upon this a little bit with the response to as I went through those 16 comments. Is that it's my strong belief that restoring that wetland will result in the best mitigation and is the proper approach. It can be done in a way that the water budget will be appropriate, that the water quality will be appropriate. If you go and create a new wetland somewhere else, you're going from a very mature, complex system, very stable system, to a very young system that will be high, extreme exposure to, or a lot of full sun exposure, which leads to tremendous amount of stress from invasive plants, and so having this system that is stable, deeply shaded, complex, mature, natural soil versus man-made soil. And we did find that the soils are primarily mineral soils. I know that there was a concern voiced, and I've seen this, where if it had been primarily organic soils and you lower the water table in an organic soil wetland, what you find is that soil elevation, the soil starts to decompose at a very high rate because it's not saturated anymore and it's organic. So you start to lose the soil surface, the wetland surface starts to lower, and that has structural problems on particularly larger trees and things like that. But we found that the soils are primarily sandy loams, and some silt loam and some subsoils that were loamy sands. And with regard to water management, if a development was proposed here and appropriate buffers were established, and you were working with, there was no issue about the wetland being drained. The water handling measures that we're proposing during construction and after construction are essentially the same for that you see and approve on a regular basis with projects that come before you. There's dewatering during construction, there's soil erosion and sediment controls, and the water flows from the developed portions of the property, from the disturbed areas of the property to streams and wetlands that are nearby. And so the only difference here is that we're starting with a drained wetland, but it very well could be a situation, if it hadn't been drained, that you'd be approving a development plan where you were allowing discharge during construction, after construction, to a wetland that was undisturbed and had all of its wetland hydrology intact. So it's really no different from that perspective. The only difference is that the duration of construction will be longer, but I think that that will not affect the rehydration of the wetland in both quantity and quality. That's the extent of the information that I have for you this evening.
All right, thank you. I'm going to panel my commissioners and ask if they have any questions, starting with Commissioner Spence.
You said that the water flows along the, pardon me, you said a lot after I came up with this question. You said a lot more, so please excuse me if I fumble through this. You had said that the water percolates through the ground until it hits bedrock, and then it travels to wherever it needs to go. Do we know where the bedrock is underneath Wetland 2 and Vernal Pool 3 to determine that that the water that's being aimed by the layer is actually being aimed to the right place? If we don't know where the bedrock is, I'm still not convinced that it might work.
We have not, within the wetland itself, dug down to a point where we've hit the rock, but it is clear to me that before disturbance here, you had a bedrock knoll, a hilltop, with a shallow soil profile on top of that, and that rock angled down towards the wetland, and the surface topography indicated that and reflected that. And that this is very common in our bedrock controlled landscape, where we have rock with shallow overburden over the surface. You know, we're not talking 20 or, if you have a drumlin landscape, you could have dozens and dozens of feet of glacial till. But here you have, you know, probably on average around 6 feet, and that's what we're showing with the liner. So, and that's why in these bedrock controlled areas you have wetlands between the rock ridges, because that rock is the side of your bathtub, and the water's hitting that and going down to the bottom. And then once you get into the end of the growing season, the leaves fall from the trees stop removing water from the ground, and sometime around the beginning of November, that bathtub water table just slowly starts to build up. And then by the time you get to the end of winter, early spring, if the wetland size is the proper size relative to the watershed, you're going to have a wetland, because that water table is going to be close to the surface, and or you're going to have water ponding on the surface. So I don't.
Are you at all
There's one interesting. I can't see any other way how that wetland existed if not for this shallow subsurface flow, direct rainwater falling right on the wetland. And but that wouldn't direct rainwater. If that was a primary factor, the wetland would be wet today. You'd have standing water. And again, the runoff in a forest is there. I'd have to look it up, but I think it's somewhere around 10% that you would expect from a forest. So the shallow subsurface flow is substantial and common in these bedrock controlled landscapes.
Okay.
And just to add to that too, Lois, the well that was installed in this northeast corner, refusal was hit at around 10 feet. And through the excavation of the area itself, I think the overburden was between 7 and 15 feet or so. So I think it's reasonably safe to assume that the bedrock through this area is probably about 10 feet down from finished grade.
Okay. Now I noticed that in the new revised plans, you have it at 6 feet, and the previous plans you had it at 3 feet. Can you tell me why you changed?
The impervious liner, I think it was always proposed to be at 6 feet. That was something that we had when we had revised it. I don't believe once we expanded.
September still said 3 feet.
I think once we made the revision and expanded the limits of that to encompass the entire area of the proposed watershed, we had made that adjustment to bring it down to 6 feet. And the reason for the 6 feet was actually primarily in response to some of the comments from Mr. Stewart, because we wanted to make sure that when we came in and built these foundations in the future, built any future potential development in this area, if we're going to build a building, put in utilities, things like that, we wanted to make sure that impervious layer was at such a depth that wouldn't be impacted as part of any future site construction within the limits of this watershed.
So you're saying that any future development would not go beyond 6 feet under any circumstances?
Well, I'm saying we designed this so that if this was developed in the future, it could be developed where we wouldn't have to penetrate that liner. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what will be proposed here. I may or may not be involved in it. All I can say is that, based on a lot of the conversations, we wanted to make sure that this liner was deep enough so that it could be avoided in the future with future site development.
Okay, that's a subject I want to talk with you about, but not right now because we're on Mr. Kenny. So I will hold my questions.
All right, that's it. Okay, Commissioner Stewart.
Well, I'm going to jump back on that for a second then. So let's say we fill this thing and it's working and the vernal pool is coming back to life. And now you guys come in the future with a development for this pad you've created, and filled it with parking lots and buildings. And now all that stormwater is being used to rehydrate the vernal pool. Do you think that it can work at that point?
Yes, I think that's the type of thing that every project you review, you're looking at. That's why there's stormwater management plan to make sure that the water is cleaned before it's discharged. And you're always, whether it's a vernal pool or not a vernal pool, you're looking to protect water quality for the waters of the state and the waters of the town, and those waters include wetlands. And that so that's just standard practice for all of your projects. And so I think that's just something that you commonly do, and with the following the state standards for stormwater management, that can be achieved.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Gingras?
I'm all set, no questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Masteracco?
This is a question for Kevin Soley. I was wondering if it's possible to see elevation drawing, maybe a cross-section drawing, where the original grade was before anything happened on this property, where the proposed grade was that was approved by the town and how far it's gone down to where it is today. That's it.
Certainly, we could certainly provide that. I think we've actually provided that in a number of different forms through a couple of different things. I know we did it as part of our response to the wetland violation, but yeah, we can provide that those sections. One of the things that we talked about before having to do with this one, this shows, and let me actually zoom in to the next slide. This actually shows the former grade, and this shows what the existing grade is, and it shows our proposed grades. We could also show on here, we could provide a series of sections that also adds what was previously approved in 2006.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because if it was done to the original plan, none of us would be here tonight talking about this. So hopefully by the next meeting, we can see something like that. I'd appreciate that, Kevin. I'm done.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Hall?
Yes, I do have a question, and it goes back to a question that Russell had, a comment that Russell had made some time ago about accelerating the process of filling and rehydration. So given your current phase 1 in this area, how long do you think it would be until we would actually begin to see measurable impact on the wetland to know that this is successful or not, or going to be successful? And particularly wetland 2, along the northern side there.
Within months of starting to rehydrate through the pumping system during the construction phase, there'll be monitoring wells in the wetland, and you can see the water table levels, and you'll be able to, and then you have wetland 4 immediately to the east, have a well there, you'll be able to compare. So if it is a drought where you don't have water near the surface, you'll be able to see that wetland 4 and not confuse that with the fact of what your effort is to rehydrate this wetland. So within half a year, certainly by the end of 1 year, you will know.
Okay, and if from the fill process, I'm assuming that with that fill process, that will begin to increase the height there, and then we would see more natural rehydration rather than the pumping eventually. And I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is, when would you be able to stop pumping and let nature take its course?
Sure. I think Kevin would be more appropriate to answer that question.
So part of that watershed gets restored as part of phase 2, but the bulk of it, the majority of the area gets kind of finally restored as part of phase 3, just because of the amount of fill required to achieve those desired grades. But I think to Bill's point, I think the dewatering exercise, or the during construction up the hill to rehydrate that wetland, is going to start to show results soon. And frankly, we're trying to address an issue that's taken place, and it's December. We're about to come into another season of vernal pool breeding, and if we go another spring without providing some rehydration, the wetland will continue to suffer. So a lot of the discussion about withdrawing and resubmitting or separating applications or things like that is only going to delay the process and prevent us from providing any rehydration during this upcoming spring. So I think if the applications are viewed favorably and we can move forward, we could likely have part of this dewatering process start in the spring, and actually potentially see some improved vernal pool activity in 2021 when compared to 2020. But the ultimate future condition where it's just going to be all superficially fed, it will take that 8 to 9 to 10 years.
Okay. For another time, I'd like to come back to, I should say at a later time, a more detailed timeline of those 3 phases you mentioned. I think that would benefit us all to have a more of a checklist view of those, but that's not for tonight's topic. And back to you, Keith.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. Okay, do we have a question from the intervener for Mr. Kenny?
Mr. Chairman, Joel Green for the intervener. Unfortunately, Mr. Logan just had to step off. He's in a hearing in Farmington presenting, and he had just texted me about 10 minutes ago and said that he is presenting at this moment. He may be able to come back shortly, but I think he has a brief couple of questions for Mr. Kenny, and if we can hold those over, the intervener would appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Russ, do you have anything you want to discuss or try to interpret from what the responses we got from Mr. Kenny? That'd be helpful.
No, I think the commission's hearing what they need to hear to make their own decisions.
Okay. All right, great. Back to Evan. You know, Mr. Green? Evan's kind of chime in, but you made it sound like you guys were all set with the questions.
Well, I didn't know that Mr. Glass had a question, Mr. Chairman. It's up to you.
Let's see. Well, let's get it out there. Mr. Glass, you got a question for Mr. Kenny? You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Evan Glass from Alton Environmental with a question through you to Mr. Kenny. At the last hearing, last meeting, Mr. Soley said that this was the best plan that he could come up with to rehydrate the wetlands. But I note that it's going to take a long duration to source this type of fill material. So my question is, from a wetland standpoint, getting them rehydrated faster, wouldn't it be a better plan to use just natural soil that can be sourced faster and therefore rehydrate the wetlands faster?
I think that the pumping, whether it's pumping or whether it's through the use of a liner as described, that the rehydration can be achieved to equal levels of success.
I can actually comment on that, Mr. Glass. You know, being in the business, it's all going to depend on what material is available. Not necessarily faster if it's natural fill. You just don't know what's going to become available. It's not like it's something that's stocked on a shelf somewhere and you just order up natural fill and bring it in. It depends on what kind of construction activity is going on, in the neighborhood, so to speak. So it's not an easy question to answer, but I think their plan is to accept all material that's available. I don't think they're going to turn away, natural material if it's available and someone wants to bring it to them. Where are we now? So, Kevin, is there anybody else that you have to present, have testify tonight?
Well, I was going to just run through, we had submitted some revised plans at the last hearing. I was going to run through those changes, or we submitted revised plans after the last meeting. I was going to run through those changes. And I was going to provide a little bit more detail and narrative regarding the rehydration process and the pumping process, because I think there was some comments made at some of the last hearings where I know Mr. DiRenzo wasn't exactly sure where some of that information was. It is included in our plans. So I was just going to kind of go through some of the details for that for the commission so they could kind of better understand the process in which we were proposing to follow. And then I also wanted to respond to Commissioner Spence's questions at the last hearing as well, to give some additional feedback on that and some other information for the commission to consider.
Why don't you start with the questions, answering the questions?
Instead of the plan changes?
Yeah, because then we kind of, you know, because people have these questions, the plans are, you could wrap it all up with the plans after. Let's get, because everybody's trying to get their questions answered.
Sure. Okay. So I think that a lot of the questions just had to do with kind of like the sequence in which and how we were going to be proposing this rehydration during construction. And all that information is detailed on our drawings. So I thought it would just be worthwhile to kind of run through that in detail for the commission. So through our initial application and through responding to comments from the town engineer, you know, our system, this represents the phase 1 soil erosion sediment control plan. You know, we have a series of sedimentation basins in the deepest section of the site, and then also smaller sections as you go from north to south, which will be collecting contributing watersheds. Those watersheds would be, you know, and these areas are going to, you know, these aren't groundwater fed basins. These are surficial watersheds where when it rains, all the water drains to the lowest part of the site. We establish sedimentation basins or sedimentation traps in accordance with the Soil Erosion Sediment Control Manual by DEED. And then these would essentially collect water, and they're sized to have sufficient volume to store the water generated from their contributing areas. What we've done and what we've shown is we've shown where these are going to take place for each phase. And we've also designed a series of, so each one is going to have a pump associated with it, where that water will then be put through a filter and then pumped up the face, the existing face along this edge, through a diffuser box, which will provide additional energy dissipation for that outlet. And then it'll run into a series of perforated pipes, which will run along here, which will allow for that pumped water to seep out almost as if it's going over a level spreader or mimicking to the best of our ability natural sheet drainage flow. It would then run along this surface and go through the silt fence or the other sedimentation basins that we have, or sedimentation SEC measures we have up along this edge. Some of the comments from Lois, she had some concerns about just doing silt fence in that area. We're certainly happy to, you know, we think that those are a good way to protect against sediment-laden water getting past the site, but we're also happy to revise that to do, we could incorporate wattles or even some potential hay bales. Generally, we would like to do, you know, and in the past, we'd like to use mulch berms as they provide great additional filtration, but usually we'll propose that in an area we're actually proposing tree cutting, and then we have a source for the wood mulch. Since we're not proposing any clearing, we don't want to cut any additional vegetation. We don't really have that material available to us, but we're happy to provide a silt fence with some wattles. In phase 2, again, these basins have to move just because during construction, during a filling operation, the low spot will change as the overall floor comes up. But we do have we have 2 additional sedimentation basins here, one in the northernmost part, one in the midpoint. Again, these would be filled during rain events, so it would mimic the natural rain events. We'd then be able to control and regulate the amount of volume of water that's pumped from those basins to go up again through filtration device, up through the diffuser box, and then into the perforated pipes, which will mimic again that sheet flow through that area. And then for phase 3, again, we modified to show where those basins are, one in the northernmost portion, one in the southeastern portion, again, until these final grades are reached. You know, we're going to have to manage the low spots as those low spots still exist until the ultimate drainage comes through. And you can see here, actually, this represents phase 3. You can see we've actually met our proposed grades in the southernmost portion. So this actually will be restoring some of that natural sheet flow as part of phase 2. And then once we get to phase 3, the balance of this will really be able to be restored in its entirety. And there were some questions in terms of how that was going to happen and you know, the pumps and things like that. We do have details on our detail sheets, which show, this is sheet 2.41. We have details which show what that sediment trap looks like, how it's constructed, and then, you know, some of the depths and other parameters with that. We have we have a number of stone line diversion channels, which are established throughout the site, to make sure that the water contributing to these sedimentation basins are renovated as much as they can be. And we also have on our detail sheets, we have details for the actual pump that we're proposing to utilize for this activity. We have details for our impervious liner detail, and the diffuser box and some of those other methods that we need to do in order to achieve these goals. Now, there's been a lot of talk and discussion about water budgets and ensuring that what we're proposing, is going to closely mimic nature to the best of our ability. What we've started to look at, and we've done it in somewhat concert with Bill Kenny's office, is kind of looking at the historic rainfall that took place at the site going all the way back to 2000. And we can utilize the former cover, as this was a steeper forested area, and we can look at what that contributing watershed was. We can do some analysis based on what the average rainfall was for those peak months when the dewatering is most critical, or when the rehydration is most critical, and that's essentially from November through May, right when those vernal pools can need that water the most, and we can mimic and manage the pumping so that we can put in the as close to the former water budget, I guess, as you'd say, that what we're trying to do now. And when we looked at it in the pre-development conditions, on average for those 5 months from November to May, there was roughly about 2,600 to 2,700 gallons per day contributing to this wetland too. And based on the reduced watershed and the existing condition that's out there, going from 9.7 acres to 2.2 acres, that wetland now is getting approximately 600 gallons per day during those peak months. And in our proposed conditions, we're able to match, obviously we're proposing to match the contributing area, but what we can do is we can regulate our pumping, our dewatering from these sedimentation basins, so that we can try to mimic the same daily flow that these wetlands would get on average over these storm events. So that, since the water accumulation is different when water is running over a forested area, over a steep hill, versus when you're in a large construction site that's a different surface. So we can use those calculations to determine how much these pumps should run, for what duration, and then we can try to mimic that same water as what's there. There were additional concerns about the phosphorus and the nitrogen that would potentially be within these discharge points. And as part of our, as we've mentioned before, this site has been under a general permit from the DEEP for both stormwater discharge for construction activities and also stormwater discharge for industrial activities. Part of our requirement with our industrial general permit is testing the outfalls of stormwater discharges during construction, during rain events, and testing those for a series of monitoring benchmarks. And those benchmarks include phosphorus, nitrogen, and a number of other constituencies. We've been, since we've been re-engaged in 2019, we've been preparing and we've been conducting those tests in accordance with those requirements. And our discharges for the stormwater discharges are within those limits of the nitrogen and the phosphorus that has been raised from a concern standpoint related to those benchmarks. So during construction, during the dewatering activities, we already have the obligation to test, and we can continue to test to make sure that those levels are in line with what they need to be, so that we aren't going to create any undue harm to these wetlands and affect the biochemistry. So, the existing stormwater discharges on the property are within those limits, and I think with all of our proposed stormwater management measures and soil erosion sediment control measures, we're going to be able to match those same things. And we have the ability to know and to maintain and to monitor exactly what those constituents are to ensure that we don't impact the biochemistry. There was also some discussion, and I think Mr. Dorenzo had made a recommendation too, if there was, if we can't control or don't know what those constituents are within that dewatering, we could potentially source that dewatering from a deeper bedrock well. which we can test and also maintain and make sure that it doesn't have any of those expediences. If during the operation, if it's ever observed that there are potential increases or levels that could raise concern, we can also modify our rehydration plan to include dewatering or include rehydrating using some of the wells that were just installed as part of our hydrogeology study. So there are other ways that we can also meet this same budget, and we're proposing that we can ensure and manage this process during the construction to get the same volume of water that was going there before. We can ensure the integrity of that dewatering or rehydration so that it doesn't have any effects on the biochemistry of those wetlands. And we think that we can achieve those goals. And I think we've provided, evidence on the record to show that that hasn't been disproven, that we can't achieve these goals. One other comment that was discussed at the last hearing in response to Commissioner Spence's concerns had to do with our proposed activity and the property line configuration, in that a lot of our restoration from a grading standpoint actually spans both 4 Independence Drive and 64 Independence Drive. So this is the existing property line configuration over the existing survey. And you can see this is our proposed grading activity, where we have a watershed from 4 Independence, and then it continues on to 64 Cambridge. What we're going to be proposing, and we're going to be submitting some information tomorrow, we are going to be proposing a lot line revision so that we modify the property line for 4 Independence Drive so that the entirety of the contributing watershed to this wetland system, this wetland 2 and the associated vernal pools, will be entirely within 4 Independence Drive, so that this will give, I think it'll hopefully address some of the concerns about, future land use applications, and making sure that this area can be installed and maintained, and it's not going to go over 2 properties, and it can really be separated to be 4 Independence Drive, and then 64 Cambridge will be the balance. Additionally, there were comments and concerns or questions or requests about granting of a conservation easement over the site or some of the wetland areas or things like that. We are proposing, and we will be submitting documentation to establish approximately 25 acres of conservation easement over the site, and this basically shows where that is. So what we're going to provide is a lot line revision plan, which can be filed on the land records, which will formally effectuate the transfer or the relocation of the property line for 64 Cambridge and 4 Independence. This can also serve as the vehicle to establish and grant this conservation easement. And so, as I said, this is about a 24.5 acre conservation easement over these wetland systems. There's approximately 18.3 acres of wetlands under this conservation easement, in addition to additional 6.16 acres of upland that would be part of this conservation easement. And, the applicant is happy to grant this conservation easement over these sensitive areas on the property. We have been, from the beginning, trying to put our best foot forward to address the actions conducted on this site by a prior owner, and we have all good intentions to try to address the issue and try to restore the impact that's been and the harm that's been done to this property and these valuable resources. So we think that by incorporating the change in the lot line, that addresses some of the concerns, and then by the granting of this conservation easement, will provide additional protection to that. And again, it's a comprehensive 24.5 acre conservation easement, which includes over 6 acres of upland review area, in addition to obviously the wetland areas themselves. And we think that this will hopefully be viewed favorably by the commission, as we are doing our best to provide not only mitigation and restoration from a hydrology standpoint, but also providing additional protection measures over these valuable resources. I think that we talked a little bit about the detailed phasing. Again, for phase 1, the primary focus is to clean out the front part of the site, get this to an area where it's clean, it's level, and then start to fill the northernmost portion of the site. This would take approximately 1 to 2 years. Phase 2 would be an additional 3 to 4 years, which would be the construction of the building out front. The basins are constructed as part of phase 1 so that this area is all clean. We do still have some diversion berms and things like that, but the processing of incoming material to place it in the hole, to set aside for QA/QC for testing and things like that, that would take place more towards the middle of the site. And then again, towards as we continue to fill the northern portion of the site. And then phase 3, which would take roughly 3 to 4 years, probably between years 8 to 10 of the overall project schedule. This again, now at this point, we'd have the entire front portion of the site, all of 64 Cambridge Drive completely finished and perfected. 4 Independence Drive would just be the last of that of those enhancements from a fill standpoint, placing the material access off of Independence. So I think that, you know, we tried to the information is in the plans, and we understand that our application is incredibly complex. It is probably the largest plan set that we've ever produced out of our office. Our engineering report and all of the appendices are exhaustive. We've tried to provide as much information as this commission needs to view the application, understand what we're proposing, understand the impacts, and how we're trying to address those concerns. We've made multiple revisions throughout this process, trying to be responsive to commissioner comments, to concerns from the public, to concerns from the intervener, and we really are trying to do our best to come up with a plan that we think achieves all the goals of everyone involved. We want to get this notice of violation addressed. We want to get this site to a place where it can be a positive contributing member of the community again, and we really want to address this issue. I think we've provided everything we need to regarding the proposed drainage activities, the proposed hydrology, and how to really restore this, restore this wetland area, to get this water back into this thing. And I think Mr. Kenny has provided testimony that he does believe that with the rehydration and the future conditions, that this wetland system will restore some of its vibrancy, and its vernal pool can be productive once again in the future. I'd be happy to answer any other questions the commission may have. I did take some notes tonight for some additional things we can provide, but I think with Mr. Taylor's testimony, with Bill Kenny's testimony, and everything we've provided, I hope that the commission can view this favorably.
I'll go through, ask the commissioners again if they have any questions. Start with Commissioner Spence.
Okay. You got a while. Now, the entire area north of Vernal Pool 3 has been cleared. Or there's not, I'm sorry, that's probably not correct. Not the entire, there's a great deal of area north of the whole Vernal Pool section, which has been cleared out from another application. That was when these properties were all linked, and there was another application that had come through. Actually, there were 2 applications, and they were kind of going concurrently, and the clearing happened from both of the applications, and it was very confusing. However, the fact remains that there's a great deal of clearing that happened on that property that took away a lot of the critical terrestrial habitat and a lot of the flora and fauna that used to live there. Is there any proposal, or can we get a proposal to restore some of that? And it's not wetlands, it's mostly uplands, I believe, but the uplands are just as important to the health and welfare of the wetlands as the wetlands themselves. That was question number 1.
Lois, are you talking about the property does not belong to this applicant?
No. I'm talking about the section where the bridge is. That's part of the. But there was a lot of other clearing. That whole area used to be heavily wooded. And I'm not talking about the western side. I'm talking about the north side.
So this is sure. So just to address that quickly, Lois. So our landscape plan, sheet 2.64, It does have some pretty extensive landscaping proposed along the eastern edge, and we are proposing some additional wetland plantings to the northern edge of this wetland. I'm sure that the applicant would be happy to expand some of this plantings to also include the area that has been cleared to the north, and we'd be happy to provide a revised plan which can achieve that, if that's something that you'd like to see.
Okay, that is something I would like to see. Thank you. Okay. You did address a lot of them. I give you a lot of credit. You guys must have been working 24/7.
I had turkey in the office. It was delicious.
Yeah. Well, I had mine on Zoom, so let me see. I appreciate the lot line change. I think that'll be very helpful when it comes to keeping it all on one property. I'm still of the opinion, however, that this should be two applications because one is remediation and one is development, and they do not go hand in hand. And they have to be handled differently. And I'm not sure how we can actually pull this off and have it be done properly. Let me see.
So if I can just address that, I know we've addressed it before. The big issue with that is this activity requires not only approval from this commission, but also planning and zoning. And the mechanisms in which we can pursue approval from planning and zoning requires a site plan approval. We can't, the Planning and Zoning Commission can't approve this plan in its entirety unless it's part of a site plan application, which is why we developed the approach that we did, because by proposing the office building to the southern end of the piece and all of the associated site work, we can pursue a permit from this commission to not only address the restoration, but also to address the regulated activity proposed as part of this project. And then this allows us to continue with the same approval with planning and zoning. If the planning and zoning regulations were not as stringent and restrictive as they are, we could certainly pursue or try to separate these applications in a different manner, but there's no way for us to do that between both regulatory bodies whose approval we need to perform this activity without doing it in the way that we proposed it.
Well, then I'm thinking that maybe we should, instead of, if you can't feel like you can separate the property by application, perhaps the phases should be separate. It's extremely hard to try to ask a commission and a department to monitor and follow something over such a long time of such a long period of time. And I'm not sure we're actually able to give you that full period, because I know what you read something in our regs, and I've read it and read it and read it, and that is not what was in the statute. And that the regulation actually doesn't say anything. It's wrong. So I don't think it works. We're allowed to give you 5 years with a 5-year extension. We can't guarantee the 10 years all at one time. So, but there's a little bit of an issue there, and I don't know how we can handle it. So that's just something I think we need to address at some point or another soon, because we're running out of time.
If I may, can I address that question very quickly, Mr. Chairman? This is
Sure,
Attorney
Mr.
Ken.
Go ahead.
So your regulations 8.9C allows you to grant an approval with a 10-year expiration date when any approval from a planning or zoning commission is also part of the project. So I know, and I know that 8.9C could be written more clearly because it cites to a chapter 124 of the Act, and that's where the confusion comes in, because the term act, I know I'm getting very legal here, but I need to put this on the record. The term act is defined in your wetland regulations as the Inland Wetlands Act, but there is no chapter 124 of the Inland Wetlands Act under our general statutes. Chapter 124 of the general statutes has to do with zoning. But clearly, the only fair interpretation of that regulation, 8.9C, which allows for a 10-year approval, is with regard to zoning. And then when you look at the general statutes under Chapter 124, there is a specific section, Section 8.3J of the Connecticut General Statutes, that authorizes a zoning commission or other municipal agency that says, in the case of a project having an area equal to or greater than 400,000 square feet, that it can provide for 10 years to complete the work under an approved site plan. So I submit that 8.9C and 8.8-3J of the Connecticut General Statutes are meant to work together, and that there was a Scrivener's error when your regulation was passed, refers to the act. Logically, it had to refer to the general statute. If you don't interpret your regulation that way, you could have approvals for large projects such as this, where you have different time expirations for the approval by zoning and the approval by the Inland Wetlands Commission. So we all know that when you have a zoning application that on a property that involves wetlands, you need to get wetlands approval. And that's exactly what we're doing here, in addition to addressing the notice of violation. So that 10-year period has to be equal between the two applications, right? Because the applications ride together. The projects, the wetlands, and the zoning aspects of this ride together. So there has to be a mechanism by which both commissions, planning and zoning and inland wetlands, can have the same time period. And in this case, your regulation, but for that, in my opinion, typo, is the mechanism which allows you to be consistent with any planning and zoning approval. Now, I've had some discussions with Attorney Schellenberg about this issue, and she believes that the regulation is ambiguous. There are rules of construction that come into play when you're trying to parse or understand a regulation, and all the rules of construction favor an interpretation that, number one, makes sure that the regulation has some meaning. So a regulation can't be interpreted to be superfluous. So if 8.9C, which allows for this 10-year period, doesn't apply to this situation, when would it apply? And the answer to that is it never would apply, because it can't be a nullity. The other aspect of statutory construction that comes in here is that regulations and statutes have to be construed to try to act consistently with one another. And that's precisely what we have here. So all of these rules of construction point to only one meaning for 8.9C of your regulations. And that is that for a project for this size, you're authorized to grant an approval with an expiration date of 10 years. Of course, you can condition the approval on adequate monitoring and can probably require that the applicant provide you with status reports and attend hearings regarding the progress of the report, so you can continue to monitor the situation as you think are reasonably necessary. But I really don't think there's any doubt that you have the authority under 8.9C to grant an approval for 10 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Finn. Barbara, you'd like to chime in on this and bring
Yes,
us up to
as
speed?
Attorney Finn said, there is ambiguity. It could have been a Scrivener's error because it is not clear as to exactly what the regulation means. It's up to the commission to determine the intent. However, I do agree with Attorney Finn's explanation as to the rules of statutory construction. So taking that into consideration, again, the commission will have to look at the language of the regulation and determine what the intent is, because the language is not 100% clear.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else from Commissioner Spence? You were That was your question, right?
That was one of them. Yes.
All right, we're gonna try to
Okay.
wrap this up in the next few minutes, so hopefully you can
Well,
get through.
I have a lot more questions, and they regarding other sections of the application, other parts of the development. And if we're going to have to truncate this, the questions won't get in.
Let's let you state the question so the applicant can receive them and get answers to them between now and the next meeting. So let's definitely do that and make sure everybody else has their questions asked so that when we continue the hearing, we can get those answers.
Okay. I had a question about on sheet 2.23, directly west of wetland flag 57. The contours get kind of funky, and there's a hooky thing in there and a large 50-foot wide, at least, flat area at elevation 460. And I'm wondering what that's all about. So obviously you don't have to answer that right now because unless you can quickly.
No, please don't.
Here?
Let's just go through and get the questions.
All right, Keith wants to just keep on going.
Wait, is this what you're talking about though? So I can know what I'm answering?
No, you're on, go to the eastern side of the wetland and go south, significantly south. You got to go to the mid-range, to the head of the wetland. Nope, keep going. Go into the midsection. Did I tell you the wrong sheet? I might have. I'm sorry if I did. Then I want the midsection, not the bottom. Yeah. All right. Now, yeah, right about there, right at look at wetland flags 57. It is I'm pointing as if you can see me. Right at the point, kind of at that wetland. There's a flat spot, and the contours, at least on my latest revision that I just got, they kind of do one of these little things, and I'm wondering what that's all about. Do you know? Can you see what I'm talking about?
I think so. Are you talking about in here?
All the way up at the top by the LOD. No, I'm sorry, not the top that way. Top of the wetland. Keep going all the way to the point of the wetland. Right. Okay. Now, from there and just a little bit south of there is north of there. I'm sorry. There's that flat spot, which I understand can be some of it. What about the spot that's next to it and just north of it, next to the finger of wetland? There's a large flat area there that doesn't have contour, and I don't understand why. What is the big wide 50-foot flat spot needed for? And Keith doesn't want you to answer me now, so that's fine.
Got it.
The guy,
Next question.
How long is the perforated pipe supposed to be in use? And what happens to it when you're done with it? Is there a removal process? Are you going to leave it there? That's another question. And is there I'm concerned much more about the filtering of the water. If you actually do dewater from the sedimentation basins in the quarry, wherever they happen to be, I'm very concerned about the trucks, the deposits from the trucks, the hydraulic fluid, the oil, whatever it is that they're going to drop through 50,000 trucks. There's going to be a lot of that stuff. It's all going to go into the sedimentation basins. Why don't you just consider going directly to a clean groundwater bedrock well, and we won't have to worry about any of that filtration stuff. It would just be natural, clean water to start with. And I don't know how you would do it, but you're the engineer. Which brings me to the next point: is is there going to be a full-time LEP on site? Because if you're going to be doing mimicking of nature, and there's just so many questions about what's going to be happening with the trucks coming in and out, who's monitoring, and who's watching the filling, and not the quality of the fill. I'm not even going there, but I just want to know: is there an LEP that's going to be on site the whole time? At some point or another during phase 3, I think you'll have trucks entering from Independence. It appeared to me that, excuse me as I jump around, as I went through the pages, I just wrote down questions as I came up with them. How will those trucks be checked if they're not going through the scale house? And how will they be sampled? Let me see. How long, you might have answered this. How long until the perforated pipe is functional? And its elevation. I couldn't quite figure out where it was going to be. Does it change? Is it one elevation the entire time? And there was a question on some of the sheets you had, I have written down here 2.31.3, dewatering as necessary. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. There are little call outs on the plan. This goes back to the LEP details on the pumping, how often, how much, filtration, who decides each time, who initiates and who terminates. I see that you had alternatives for your impervious liner, and one was clay mixed with something, and then the clay mixed with something else, and then there was polyethylene or some kind of plastic. I don't like the plastic. Plastic brings its own problems. So if we could just discount that one altogether, that would be much better in my mind. Got that one written. Oh, and at what point, it seems to me that we should have an evaluation of how this is working during each phase, not just at the end of each phase, but say when we're filling the hole and we see where the groundwater is going, that need to have progress reports. How is it going like you want it to go? Is it going like it should be going? And then how do we need to change it to make sure that it's going? So this is one of the reasons I kind of like the phasing application course, because there would, once we're done with this, we're done with this. And we don't get a chance to have at it anymore. And we have a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, and we really need to make sure that this is being done right. So as much as, and I agree, I believe you when you say you're trying to do your best, but we have a lot of vetting to do, and I haven't had a lot of time to do it. Oh, it seems like forever, but it's still not enough time to do it. So I'm very concerned about the progress and monitoring and that kind of thing.
Okay. Any other questions, Lois?
Yeah, wait, just a minute, almost. You got to get them all out, Keith, or we don't have a full application.
No, we're just trying to speed it along a little bit. It's almost
I know.
almost past Clark's bedtime.
Well, that's when the commissioners get their chance, is when it gets close to bedtime. Everybody else gets the earlier time. I was also looking for alternatives, considering the groundwater well. I mentioned this a couple of times and nobody has ever said anything about it, and that was the concept of pumping clean water from a groundwater well at the very, very head of wetland 2. Would it filter down? Would it trickle downhill, since it is a downward slope? Would it trickle down at all and water them that way? It was just a thought, but nobody said anything about it, which probably means it doesn't have any merit, but I would like to find out. And that's it. So for now, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stewart, any questions for answered at the next meeting?
I'm good for tonight.
Thank you. Commissioner Gingras.
God, Lois has actually said so much that now I'm confused. I'm good for tonight then. Forget it. I'll have to relook at all the maps again that I was looking at today. But
okay.
Actually, excuse me if I can just interrupt. Commissioner Gingrich, are you able to state on the record that you listened to the portion of the last part of the public hearing from the last meeting, the portion that you missed?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Commissioner Massaraco?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall?
Just a couple of quick comments. Kevin, thank you very much for that last presentation. That helped quite a bit in helping us understand the phases and how the pumping will occur. The problem is, my second comment is now I share a lot more of Lois's concerns about the amount of time and the detail. So I'll look forward to the answers to Lois's questions. And back to you, Keith.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. Okay, so I think we're close to wrapping this up for the evening. Kevin, I had asked at the last meeting for cross sections, and I think Commissioner Massaraco asked tonight a similar question. And I would point out right through the middle of your new proposed 2 different lots, like right from the west to east to west, whatever, between 4, the higher lot and the lower lot. So 4 Independence and 64 Cambridge. And those cross sections will show your proposed elevations, your proposed elevation, the existing elevation, and the one that was approved in 05. I know you have something there, but you said, I think you said tonight you were missing one detail in it.
Yeah, we don't have the approved grades from 2006. I mean, we can certainly show those. I don't think it'll substantively change what we would be proposing, but we're happy to give that to you guys so you can understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was all. That's the only thing I have to say. And it looks like Commissioner Spence wants to throw something in before we close.
I'm sorry, I forgot about a very important part of what I wanted to bring up. On the development portion of Lower 64 Cambridge, it appears to me that all of the water from that area is going into the 2 sedimentation basins at the end of phase 3. And I'm not talking about the other ones along the sides as we are going through the phases, but at the end of phase 3, we're ending up with 2 sedimentation basins, one to the direct west and just north of the building, and the other one to the east of the building and south of it. But all of the water that they're collecting from the entire 64 Cambridge site, are they not? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, all of that water is being directed to Wetland 1. Now,
that's correct.
That some of that, well, now we didn't have a watershed map here, but it seems to me that they're taking away a lot of the water that should go to the southeastern wetland. There, you can see that there's wetland flags there, and there's a good sized wetland that's right there that is being dewatered because, and Wetland 1 is getting too much water, as evidenced most likely by the vernal pool that is either keeping its water too long or getting too much. We don't really know. There's an awful lot of water that's going in the wrong direction. We usually try to maintain the same watershed patterns as pre-development. So that was a major thing that I wanted to point out to you. And the other one was a question concerning to our wetlands experts. Since this area completely bisects many wetland areas, should we be using Cape Cod curbing instead of traditional curbing to allow for crossing for amphibian species? And that is it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So Lois, just real quick, we actually went through this in detail with Scott Schatzline, and we actually did not only match pre and post for the ultimate build out, but he actually made us match pre and post during the phases. So our engineering report has all of those watersheds and all that watershed analysis, and actually this wetland here that you mentioned is being starved is actually fed through this, the wetland to the east, which is getting fed from our detention basin in this corner. And then there's actually two different crossings where wetlands come underneath Cambridge Drive, and it all kind of flows back to it. And this wetland here is actually also refed from the development at 50 Cambridge with Axle Plastic. So we did look at all of those components, but we can give you a more detailed presentation as to how we maintained those contributing watersheds and all the different storm events. But Scott did make sure that we went through that exercise ad nauseum as part of our response to his comments, both with wetlands and planning and zoning.
Okay. I think we could adjourn this meeting and move this hearing on to our next meeting, which I believe is next Wednesday, right? The 9th?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Do
Green.
you want our question? We have 3 quick questions. Do you want the questions posed now or at the next meeting?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you have questions for the next meeting, yeah, go ahead. Rattle them off. To the
Mr.
applicant.
Glass will do it.
Okay. You're muted, Mr.
Mr.
Glass.
Glass, you're muted.
I apologize. Evan Glass, Alta Environmental, Colchester, Connecticut, for the intervener. 3 quick questions for the commission to consider between now and the next meeting. Regarding Lois's question of splitting the application, would it make sense to consider just filling the north end, the crater end, to rehydrate the wetlands as part of one application and then have a separate application for development after? Second question, given that there's an existing complaint at DEP, does it make sense to get some weigh in on DEP regarding the fill at the site that's already there and to come in so that you don't maybe end up approving more fill coming in that DEP may or may not want there? And 3, given the number of questions that there still are this late in the process and the revisions this late in the process, does it make sense for the commission to have more time to review this complicated proposal? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So our next meeting is next Wednesday, which will be a regular full agenda meeting. And we will see, I guess, if we have any time or how much time we'll have to get to the questions that have been given to the applicant. And then we have the potential of a second special meeting, I think the following week. Am I wrong? Commissioner Spence?
I'd rather not have any more special meetings. I'm getting too close to the holiday season now, but I did want to.
But we do have we have the possibility. I'd rather not as well. So we can make that turn. We don't have to have the special meetings. Like, we're doing enough. We're trying to get through this thing, and maybe we could jam it all in next Wednesday.
I just want to remind you to open the floor to the public.
I thought I did already at the beginning of the meeting. But I could do it again. You mean now?
I thought now, because they might have comments on what transpired tonight.
Questions? Okay, if anybody in the public has a comment or question about anything that was presented this evening, you could speak up and ask your question. Okay, that's nobody. Thank you. Thank you, Lois, for the reminder. So we'll move this this application to the next scheduled meeting. And is there anything else I need to do before I adjourn the meeting? I don't think so. All right.
Make a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
I'm making a motion. Yeah, that's right. I forgot that. It's late. Was that from Commissioner Gingras?
Yes.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Stewart. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is adjourned at 10:13 p.m.